Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the show, I'm joined by Paris Sood. Paris has broad senior level experience across the entire procurement value chain as a practitioner at a procurement tech company and in procurement consulting. Most recently, Paris was the global head of strategic procurement transformation for Deutsche Bank and just made the move back into consulting at Future Purchasing. In today's conversation, I tap into Paris's experience in driving transformation to discuss his experience in driving those from vision setting to behavioral change and lots in between. Paris also shares his approach to transformations and how that has evolved to meet changing C-suite expectations. So let's go straight into the conversation where I asked Paris to share if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
So I'm going to answer that with a 50-50 statement. I started on a graduate management scheme with a company called Tarmac in Anglo-American, part of the Anglo-American group. And one of my rotations was in procurement and supply chain. I knew nothing about procurement and supply chain when I joined the business or joined the business world. I started getting intrigued by negotiations, just being with a variety of kind of companies. And I actually went back into kind of corporate functions for a bit in that company. And at the back of my mind, I was just thinking, I really want to be in procurement and supply chain. There's just something so exciting about the space. Yeah. So stumbled across it. Wasn't a linear path. So it kind of found me. I found it.
What made you want to stay
in procurement and supply chain? Yeah, I think just the diversity of stuff that you can do in the profession, and if I contrast it with other functions like finance or IT or HR, whilst you get certain kind of good qualities out of that and good practices out of it, I didn't see something that was so commercially oriented where you're really building relationships at the heart of what you're doing, but at the same time having to work with lots of functions. Yeah. And I never came across that in other functions that I was part of in my rotational scheme. So I think that kind of got the hook for me. And then over time, it's just kind of expanded in depth and breadth across the space, and procurement's grown as a profession itself. So, natural evolution, I would say.
Yeah, and that was my story as well, basically, without necessarily I went into the procurement rotation. I didn't even get I didn't get as far as doing the rotation out of procurement, and I figured I would stay, but not having a clue what it was when I went into it in the first place.
Yeah.
And since then, I mean, you've worked on both. In fact, you've worked on the practitioner side, you've worked on the consulting side, and you've worked on the software side as well with Bravo Solution.
That's right.
How has those different experiences kind of shaped you as a procurement leader, and having kind of that 360 perspective, if you will?
Yeah, I definitely think all experiences have shaped me, and everything I deliver now and hopefully going forward will always have the best of hopefully all of those experiences. Likewise, I've taken my bad beats and my learnings through those experiences. I didn't know the practices from the outset, but I think that I do feel lucky. I've had that privilege of being in different parts of the procurement landscape, and I think sometimes people who've just been in industry may not understand the kind of enterprising nature of how a lot of procurement comes together. And likewise, some people in consulting don't always know the realities that people go through as a CPO or a CPO's leadership team or whatever. And I think I feel really privileged to have been able to experience that on both sides of the fence. And I think hopefully it gives me a lot of relevance when I'm having impactful conversations, really.
Yeah, it's really easy, as you say, as a consultant, to be a little bit removed from reality when you're making recommendations if you're not deliberately keeping current, if you will, around what is what a practitioner is facing at any one moment in time. But what I always found was coming from, as a practitioner first, then going into consulting.
Yeah.
And really procurement services as much as consulting it gave you this new appreciation of procurement as a service as opposed to procurement as a function. And the mindset then changes about how you realize that as a consultant or as a provider, somebody can terminate your contract at any moment and you're gone. Whereas when you're in a function, I don't necessarily think that you think like that.
No, and I think that's a good analogy, Phil. I think as a service seems to be quite a more common concept than it did maybe in the start of my professional career, and that can be extended, and it doesn't just need to be in a technology landscape or in a managed services landscape. It's you being a partner with the business and learning how to have that kind of service mindset of sorts. I think that's a really integral sort of leap that procurement's had to take as a profession.
Yeah. Now I want to talk a little bit today around transformation, because it's something that you've really had a lot of heavy involvement in the last few years. When we use the word transformation, I'd love your perspective on, when we think transformation, I think the word transformation evokes this project-based. It has a start and it has an end. Do you see procurement transformation as being project-based, or is it really just at this point an ongoing evolution? Like, people joke about transformation never ends. Is it because it's really just a continuous improvement and evolution?
Yeah, good question. Transformation, I suppose, has different definitions for different people in our space, but probably in other functions and areas as well. But my personal sort of interpretation of transformation, piecing things together, has been pretty much trying to move from a place where you are today to somewhere more desirable in a very simple sort of state. And I think, to your point on projects, is that a project? Is it a BAU? Is it continuous improvement? I think you can think in a kind of time-bound fashion or in a project-based fashion with transformation. And I think you should do that. Otherwise, you can end up procrastinating quite a lot. But also, if you think of a traditional waterfall project methodology, the world's moved on and a lot more agility is coming into transformation. So I think trying not to be too linear with that transformation journey and thinking more about how do you transform in different ways is important. But I would have a time bounding to some degree to transformation. I just think that it's such an overused word in the profession from what I see, and I think it's luckily not getting the wrong connotations of going into BAU and continuous improvement, but it's trending towards that territory. If we're not careful as a professional kind of group driving that.
Yeah, I definitely can see the benefit of having something that's date bound, because it's something to focus towards achieving, as opposed to it being really open-ended. Sometimes you go into groups and say, we're going to go and transform, when you're selling and advocating for transformation, and you get all these eye rolls of, well, didn't you just do that like 3 years ago? And so that's where maybe some of the messaging is more helpful around it being ongoing, iterative, continuous improvement. But yeah, for rallying the troops, I can absolutely see, and from a project management perspective, why looking at it as an event is helpful.
Yeah, I think rallying the troops is a good point as well. Cliche to say it's a journey, but if transformation is a journey, you're taking people on that journey. And I think everybody who may take part in transformation or be a part of transformation needs to realize that they're on a similar kind of boat to those goals of sorts. So I think it's a catalyst for teams as well, I would say.
We talk a lot about being a catalyst at Art of Procurement, as you think about it in the context of transformation, because I think that's really important. Like, as somebody who's leading a transformation in procurement, what are some of the things you can do to catalyze that change?
Yeah, I don't think there's any shortcut to hard work when it comes to catalyzing change. I think firstly, you need to have a bit of a vision and be able to tell a story of what transformation may enable for an organization. And I'll come back to enablement as a whole for transformation, but you should be able to tell that transformation vision and story to your stakeholders, whoever they might be, whether it's the team, whether it's functional stakeholders, external stakeholders. But then you just need solid leadership. I mean, transformation is not easy, and people driving transformation have got a tough ride. People on the journey of transformation have got a tough ride. So you need leadership, not just with people who are probably in the coalface of transformation, driving that change, but also giving everybody a sense of self-leadership, or almost democratized leadership, like across
empowerment.
Empowerment is great. Is a much better word for it. And I think getting into that mindset that transformation doesn't come on a plate; it comes on transformative change for individuals, and that requires a level of self-reflection, self-leadership of sorts to get there.
Yeah, when you're figuring out what the transformation journey should look like, what sources do you go to help build that roadmap? Or should I maybe say, how do you take different folks' perspective plus outside perspectives on what transformation should look like?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of good firms that have transformation kind of frameworks of sorts that can help you shape something. If you've got nowhere to start, there's lots of places that can help you shape a framework of sorts that takes you through that kind of that process. But I think that the danger with doing that too much is that you lose context and you can't contextualize it with the organization that you're working with. And that requires actually far more interview-based kind of one-to-one engagement of individuals, teams, etc., which no matter what framework you put in, you get far more understanding of maybe where an organization currently is, and even what its appetite for transformation may be before you embark on that framework journey. So I think trying to get the best out of both is important because it helps with that storytelling, but at the same time, trying to be a lot more acutely aware of what the organization is going through is probably more important.
And does that help you then identify more objections as well? So kind of head off potential landmines, so to speak, later on in the process, because you've actually got a better understanding of where some of the fears are of transformation up front.
Yeah, I do think it helps remove those barriers to entry, so to speak. And you're always going to have naysayers in that transformation journey. You're always going to have resistors to that change. If you've got a large amount of resistance in a certain area, you know that you probably can't build that into your quick win pipeline of transformation. so you've got to be aware of it, and you've got to. It's not to say that you don't tackle it and you don't try and tackle the uglier, kind of bigger parts of a transformation, because often that's part of the agenda or part of the challenge in its own right. But knowing when to sequence that and when to tackle it and how to tackle it, and it's all about getting the right thing at the right time in that transformation sort of cycle.
You talked about quick wins, which I think is really important. Are there, do you always go into a transformation thinking these are the 5 quick wins that I need to achieve, and those are pretty similar regardless of situation, or how are you looking to decide which of the quick wins I want to go and hit?
Yeah, my personal approach has been to start with outcomes initially. So where do we want to get to as an organization? If we had a magic wand, where would we be putting our flag somewhere? And then working backwards. Of course, it's probably pretty easy to come up with a set of quick wins. If you've been in the space for a while, you might know that there's some low-hanging fruit to kind of just cross off, and you might be more astute to certain things as you've seen them in different places. But I think there is a risk that if you focus on those low-hanging fruit as a kind of off-the-shelf quick win scenario, you've lost sight of maybe the bigger picture of where you're trying to get to. So trying to tally it back to the bigger picture is important. However, you don't want to get so caught in the bigger picture that you lose sight of the things that are on your doorstep, so to speak. So, but I would normally start with outcomes.
Okay.
And not overthink that. Just start with outcomes and then work backwards for the quick wins. Yeah.
From a business case perspective, because we talk to a lot of folks both on the practitioner side, but also on the software side, and we talk around doing pilots and smaller projects and being more iterative. Like from a business case, when you're making the business case for investment in transformation, do you find that anything has changed in terms of, well, we used to be able to go and say, this is a 3-year program and needs to be funded at we approximate this much, kind of sign off on the lump sum and we get to work, versus now it's, well, this is the first milestone, and that milestone may only be 1/10 of the project. We get funding to do that, and then we have to go back and ask for more. Have you seen any changes in how organizations? I'm really just looking for advice on business cases and whether you see that business cases are getting smaller and more iterative versus, let's go and do a 3-year transformation program.
Yeah. I think the business case environment has evolved. And maybe the 3 to 5 year transformation sort of journeys that orgs might be going on. For me, that they're kind of the past, because or therefore very older or a lot older institutions where they're wrestling that real kind of heavy infrastructure and they're trying to replace it with something else. You might have technology or ERP kind of
it's a long-term change.
It's a long-term change, and you've built an SAP and then you're trying to build something else. And I think that those journeys happen still, and they are still prevalent, but they're not as common as they used to be. And I think now that we're more into this kind of dare I say it, kind of cloud-based, SaaS-based way of thinking, technology change can be a bit more off the shelf and on demand. And it means that kind of change cycle from a technology perspective it shortens. But I think what people miss in that whole sort of change landscape, in the business case landscape, is the cost of change broadly, which is far more people oriented. And the technology investment is one thing, and you normally have a multi-year journey for technology investment because of capitalizing costs, or because of trying to as you said, look at year 1, year 2, year 3. But that is only as good as the people-based change that you've correlated that with. And that might be headcount related, it might be skills related, it might be something else. And trying to balance the two together can be a bit of a challenge for, I think, that business casing.
And I'd love to talk a bit more about the people and the behavioral side of things, but I do want to ask, from a technology perspective, do you look for, are you building process around technological capabilities, or are you looking for technology that fits the process that you want to build?
That's the $1 million question, Phil. I think that I must have heard that question in most organizations. And I'm probably still going to be on the fence. I think it's got to be a bit of both. Maybe back to what I was saying about frameworks before. You imagine a procurement framework or a procurement process or cycle. That has to be relevant to the organization. So designing that process framework has to be relevant. A bank versus an FMCG company has completely different value chains that it's got to design. So no one tech solution will fit that FMCG organization or that bank. There might be some similarities and commonalities. So then I suppose if you've got a relative design of a process and framework in whatever industry you're in, there are technology applications that can help you leapfrog and not have to overthink how you're going to design that framework and then put it into another place and put it into another place. I think one thing that I've encouraged and I've seen work well is that kind of early visibility into technology, a bit of road testing, a bit of thinking. It might be a proof of concept, or it might just be understanding what the technologies are that are out there. And then you've got to be a bit more agile and say, well, this is what we think is a design principle based on our framework and our organization. Oh, but this is what the technology is saying to us. How do we bring the two together? And being agile with that thinking is the most important thing to getting good technology outcomes.
And that agility, some of it is driven now by low code or no code, for example, solutions. Now, does that help us? Because from an architect's perspective, you're architecting a tech stack, being able to do that quickly, experiment, iterate, discard if it doesn't work, try something else, is kind of a dream. But on the other hand, if you're not, as an organization, able to move that fast, or there's, you can perceive risk associated with that, it can be a hindrance. I just wonder where you stand on whether that democratization of technology is a positive or kind of a roadblock, because it presents too many opportunities that you get stuck in, paralysis by analysis.
Yeah, it's a kind of blessing and a curse situation that we've got ourselves into. Yeah, I've seen both sides of the coin as well. I've seen maybe back to what I was saying at the beginning of my career. I've seen a lot more code based. You've really got to be a subject matter expert in the configuration of said technology in your procurement value chain. Whereas, to your point, nowadays, I think you can take that a lot for granted and just focus on UX and user experience and
this
that
is
kind
the
of
workflow
stuff.
I want to enable, and I just kind of tell it to do it, and I don't need to worry about how it does it.
Yeah, personally, I think that's a good space to be in, because it helps you focus on the value and the outcomes as a professional, either driving that change or as a CPO or procurement leader having to inherit that change. You can go down a rabbit hole with too much configuration. However, I think obviously people are still having to become more tech savvy in terms of knowing that pretty much everything you're doing has to probably fall into some kind of tech stack or SaaS-based solution nowadays. So to be divorced from the realities of a workflow-based system is I don't think it's acceptable in our current environment generally.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm excited by the opportunity it brings to be able to, build. At the end of the day, I know it's, again, so cliche about there's no one size fits all, but I really strongly feel about that from, organization design and culture perspective. But we've kind of attempted to implement transformation solutions suggesting that there is a one size fits all. This is the way to do it. This is the framework. This is the technology, and if you're not conforming with that, it's because there's a problem with your organization, not a problem with the stuff that you're trying to implement. But now, as you start to get to no code and low code and all the different workflows that you can build, you can truly have 500 different ways of buying 500 different things based on how your organization wants to buy. That's all pre-programmed, so nobody ever needs to know about it. All that they need to know is I start here, and I'm going to be guided through that whole process. And I think that's really, there's a huge opportunity for procurement in that.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you think about the work hours that are taken in trying to get to that answer from the past, which is heavy config, heavy design, architecture, all that kind of stuff. In some ways, a lot of that has been absorbed by the technology community to allow professionals to focus more on change management. And I think that's important.
And so let's move to change. You talked about behavioral change as well being really important. A lot of people in the organization, both on the procurement side and stakeholder community, are not necessarily going to like the changes that we implement going through a transformation process. How can we deal with people who are upset with change, or who are not necessarily bought into the change we're wanting to drive?
Yeah, my take on trying to get change right is maybe, Phil, if we focused on a larger scale organization, just as a kind of relative idea at the moment, a large scale organization, as a starting point, has an operating model really been truly designed with that organization's needs in mind? And that's even before you get to the kind of organization design stuff. It's just that the way you want to operate as a procurement outfit with the rest of the business and with your suppliers, has that really been thought through? And then have you designed an organization that kind of is set up to work with that operating model? And if you've not gone through those kind of those broad sort of strategic change pieces, I think you're struggling with everything else. Everything else kind of has a knock-on effect to it. But one thing that I've kind of seen be an important part of that change kind of curve has been knowing how to segment the people within your setup. And what I mean there, I know that sounds maybe a bit crude, but the likelihood is in bigger organizations, you've got new talent coming in out of graduation into the procurement environment, getting excited like we were maybe one day, and thinking, what an amazing area to be in. I'd love to get my hands dirty in that space and do whatever I can. And then you might have other people at the latter stages of their career who have been there, done that, gone through the cycles of transformation, as you've seen, and just exhausted. They're kind of fatigued by too much change. And then you've got some stuff in between, maybe, whatever that kind of community of individuals are. Now, if you segment the kind of workforce accordingly, and you start understanding who are the people who are going to maybe be semi-catalysts to the change, who are the people who are going to be actually excited by maybe new opportunities out of the change that kind of redefine what they've done. You've got to go through that process. It's not about just kind of designing frameworks and designing kind of pieces of paper. It's really about understanding individuals and where they best fit in to a new kind of operating model, and then not being afraid to kind of have the tough kind of dialogue around what that means. I still think that change management generally is undercooked as a kind of area within procurement, and a lot of procurement is about change management, and a large portion of that is people aren't speaking to each other enough about what change curves might be. So
no, we're completely aligned with the impact of change management and how we under invest in change management and maybe over invest in the RFP process to pick the right technology solution. As an example, when all the surveys and everything that we do and the data we collect suggest that the roadblocks are really change management related roadblocks, not features and benefits of specific tools. It's more around how do you bring those? I mean, the art is how do you bring those two together, making sure you pick the right technology and you've got the right change management process. I'm fascinated by the idea of segmentation because, from a segmentation perspective, then you can choose your communication strategy can be different based on each one of those 4 segments, how you communicate, what you communicate, and all the things that go along with that. What are some of the ways that you figure out how to put who in what box?
Easier said than done. Data, I know data is probably overused as a term itself, but data is important even in the change journey. And I think understanding profiles of people, roles, and where they sit in the organization, that all gives you intelligence to kind of understand a bit of that segmentation in the first instance. And that will also include tenure of people in their career paths and such. So if you can get your hands on data in those situations, that's one thing. I think the other thing is being really clear on what competencies will complement the capability or the organization structure. So if you are, for example, really wanting to double down on supplier relationship management or supplier collaboration, just maybe as an area, and you've got a bunch of people who have only been doing RFPs, sourcing, for the majority of their life, it's a completely different skill set to then try and realign them. So I think understanding what those capability areas and competencies that might sit within that doesn't mean that those people who have only been doing sourcing, category management can't traverse, but you've got to know that they're going to go through some kind of change and coaching and training, etc. Or you are thinking about different talent that might exist outside of your existing talent pool, and you've got to think about where do they best fit in into that framework as well. So
that makes me think about when we're looking at transformation. There's obviously, we talked about there's a vision and we're driving towards a vision. Sometimes the vision can be too different from today to it not seem to being realistic. And so I'm interested to know, how do you think around how should an expansion of, not necessarily an expansion of capabilities, I'm thinking an expansion of value levers that procurement can help the organization pull. How much should we think about that in terms of that initial transformation? So earlier in your career, you had responsibility for ESG as an example, and risk. Should we be building that into a procurement transformation plan of doing something that we don't do at all today? Or should it be more iterative? Let's get better at the things the organization needs today. And then once we've got that and we've built a better perception of procurement, then we start to take let's go and bring additional value levers in. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm generally a longer term thinker in my mindset, and it's the reason why I've probably done some of the stuff I've done in my career to date. So I would always still start with some vision in mind and an aspiration. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, trying not to over analyze what that vision might look like, but just recognize that there might be something quite a lot greater than where you are today. So, for example, if you're a heavily process-driven, manually driven organization, you might want to be, far more digitized in the future. That's just a cliche example. And that means you're going to have to build and build and build and architect whatever you might need to architect. That said, being really clear with phasing, and I think this is the point that you were making on how you get to that potential outcome. Maybe that outcome changes because things change over time and visions change over time. But having a vision and then being really, really clear of phase one or in year one, this is what we're trying to deliver, and we're going to focus on that. We're going to project manage that. We're going to have agile teams around that. Whatever that is, you've got to be a lot more prescriptive in that kind of earlier stage of what you're doing. And maybe you build in to your kind of first phase or year one kind of way of thinking. Maybe you build into it a review phase of what that end vision might look like.
Yeah.
So just you've got to set everybody on some similar store. Otherwise, you kind of everybody. Then it's like no democracy. It's just like whatever you want to do. So so I think, but having a level of discipline alongside the bigger vision is crucial to kind of obviously moving forward and making progress.
Yes, that iterative approach at least make sure that you're not over promising and under delivering in the short term, while at least having a bigger picture vision. And I actually liked what you said around having checkpoints in there to make sure the vision is still the right vision, because as a service provider, in my past, I would often see that contracts would be signed and everybody would it'd be a 5-year contract, and everyone's excited about this 5-year contract and the journey you're going to go on with your supplier and all the great things you're going to do together. And then after 2 years, the whole business has changed, and now you're locked into 3 more years of this thing that you don't really need anymore. And because you don't have the contractual mechanism to adjust on the fly as business conditions change, it ends up with everybody hating each other and thinking that this is a waste of money, and just lots of kind of burned bridges. And I think that that's a possibility with procurement transformation, is if you start on a journey that the business no longer needs exactly what they did at year 1 in year 3, that you have the ability to cost correct as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned around kind of sustainability and risk, or ESG and risk, and as a kind of an aspiration that maybe quite a few procurement organisations are trying to move towards. I think it's a tense battle at the moment, because you've still got the cost and maybe the financial agenda that procurement drives, generally speaking, and then you have got the softer / more societally or more socially beneficial outcomes that are also important to procurement. I think as part of that transformation journey, you're probably going to want to do both, but knowing the weight of what's more important in that transformation journey for your organization is also important. So again, some data might have been spun about around 70% of an organization's sustainability footprint sits with its supply chain.
Right.
Now, if that's your reality, you're going to want to put that at the heart of your transformation journey to make sure that they are outcomes that you're trying to drive towards. But if it's more about kind of reputational management and some of the kind of softer parts of even sustainability, then you just got to get the balance right of what those outcomes are in that transformation journey. I think both are important right now. So if you're not talking about both in a transformation journey, there's something probably not quite right with the transformation.
So how do you think about procurement setting the agenda versus, we talked a lot about outcomes and driving to outcomes and being aligned with the business on the outcomes the business wants to see. But sustainability is a good example. There may be organizations where sustainability is not top of the organizational priority list right now, but as procurement, we know it's a challenge, an opportunity, it's emerging, it's something that from a business perspective we should be focused on. is it up to procurement as part of that vision setting to include things that the business might not know it needs? Or should we be less focused on that and more around, here's the 3 business strategies, for the next 12 months or 24 months, and that's what we should be building our capabilities around?
That's a incredible question, really, because I don't think I've seen an organization that hasn't had that same challenge of knowing how to align to strategic objectives. And I think on the one hand, the business rule and the business is the business. The markets they are going for are what you have to align to. And business partnering, as a result, is the most important part, I think, of procurement's relevance when it comes to an organization's direction of procurement. So I think that it has to be the starting point, really effective business partnering, to encourage that dialogue between procurement and the front side of the business, so to speak, if you can call it that. That said, procurement's in this really privileged position of what I would call education. And I don't mean education just about procurement, but I mean education of the outside world into the enterprise.
We get to see, as we said right at the beginning, a lot of things that a lot of folks in the organizations are privy to because just the broad remit that we have.
Exactly. And I think sometimes that doesn't get called out enough, I would say, in our sphere, because the categories of spend that organizations, large organizations, are typically dabbling with have just got some of the most innovative companies in the supply chain that are presenting new ways of thinking, that are challenging organizations, often moving towards joint ventures or alliances with organizations. And the learning abilities within that space are huge. So as a procurement professional in that kind of middle bracket, your role becomes so important. You're educating internal stakeholders of external markets, but you're also maybe educating the value of procurement broadly with those business partners and those divisions and whoever else. So I think education's more important in our world than in many other functions in that regard.
Yeah, it's always such a hard one, because we talk all the time, banging the drum every day around aligning with the needs of the business, but at the end of the day, we should be helping to set those business needs, if you will. I have one really tactical question, because it just was something that came off something you said there, and I know it's about time to wrap up, but I want to know you talked about business partnering and the importance of business partnering. What makes a good business partner from a profile perspective?
Yeah. I think a good business partner is not a traditional procurement professional. That's maybe as a starting point. I think a good business partner is advanced in their soft skills way of thinking, and that is engagement on a kind of emotional intelligence kind of perspective with multiple stakeholders. But also, whilst they can be quite strategic in their nature, business partners, because they're looking for more strategic outcomes that are aligned to the business, generally speaking, I think they've got to be quite culturally aware and open-minded to what direction procurement may go in. And I think sometimes the traditional procurement mind is, we kind of got the answers and we just need to take it to our key stakeholders. Whereas actually turning that on its head a bit as a business partner is more about, well, this is what I'm hearing from the business. This is where I think good procurement practice comes together. So you've got to be a conduit to both your own function or your own practice area in procurement and also the business. And so facilitation becomes a really crucial part in the business partner role.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I look at it as like a client delivery lead in a consulting organization, where you're basically doing the same. Like you got access to a lot of things within procurement, but really your job is to figure out what your stakeholder needs from that, and then how to put them best into practice.
Agree.
And keep them on point, when you have folks in the organization then supporting them directly.
Agree. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Paris, on today's pod. We've covered a lot in terms of transformation, and something that obviously is it's not going away anytime soon from a procurement perspective. But that's great because that provides opportunity for us as a profession to continue to elevate our impact, which we're definitely all about. The last question that I always ask, and I always say, is the easy question, so you can take a sigh of relief that no more hard questions. Is if anyone is interested in kind of connecting with you, following up, just speaking directly with you, where's the easiest place for them to find you?
LinkedIn. I was one of the early adopters of LinkedIn in my professional life, and it's a great mechanism for people to kind of reach out. So I'm always welcoming any connections of sorts. I do not discriminate, so reach out.
Send over those connection requests. Well, what we'll do is we'll include the link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes page for today's episode. And today's episode, like all of our other Art of Procurement episodes, will be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast. Just one last time, thank you very much for joining me today. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.